think it's 2 minutes past 10. So very good morning again to everyone, and welcome to another iToO. I just wanted to say thanks to Willie and the excellent iTOO claims team for the past few weeks. And you guys have set the bar really high. So thank you for the past couple of weeks and those excellent presentations. And for getting us off to such a good start to the year on iToO. So my name is Greg Dillon, and I'd like to welcome our two colleagues, Kopano Tolo, who's our underwriting specialist in drones, and Ryan van der Koolwyk, who's iTOO's cyber product champion. And we're calling this part one of Game of Drones. Get the alliteration. In a time, perhaps when there's a dark shadow of Vladimir Putin looming large over Eastern Europe, we felt it might be appropriate to actually talk a little bit about drones in the context of cyber, the sort of cyber threats that come with them, and the possibility, and worse still, of cyber attacks under the guise of somebody who's in control of a drone where they not necessarily ought to be. So from an iTOO special risk point of view, we've been involved with drones for some time now, and we like to pride ourselves on the fact that we date back to the beginning of the sort of emergence of the drone industry here in South Africa. And we feel that we're uniquely positioned to help you as a broker community with your drone insurance requirements. So small advert, if you don't mind. And as the technology evolves, so it's important for us from an underwriting point of view to also try and keep up to pace with the needs of both the commercial drone operators and their clients, importantly. So this is what this is about, a little bit of insight into the world of cyber and how it's interconnected, and Kopano and Ryan will unpack that for you today. We also know that drones are not only a threat, but they're also magical. And so we wanted to start with something a little bit magical. And there's a video here that shows 1,824 drones, all small 340-gram Intel premium drones that were used at the start of the Tokyo Olympic opening ceremony, and some magic that comes from drones as well. So Kopano, over to you.
Thank you, Greg Dillon, for that lovely introduction. And once again, welcome to everyone for joining us for Game of Drones Part 1. As Greg mentioned in his introductions, we have seen the civil and commercial application of drones increase in the past couple of years. So in recent times, drones have been utilized widely for different purposes, like flying photography, crowd monitoring, rescue activities, and so forth. The COVID-19 pandemic drove us to observe the use of UAVs in the productive and safe conveyance of food and medical supplies. However, technology is a double-sided sword. we can't deny the fact that drones help us build a superior world. It is additionally posing a developing danger to public society. Some of the industries which we've seen that have expanded into the offering of drones, such as the construction industry, which uses drones mainly for surveying and inspections. The security industry is also an industry which has developed and deployed drones in some of the surveillance work of warehouses, where it would take time for a human to go around to inspect a warehouse. Drones are being deployed for such services. Some private security firms are using drones for surveying in some Johannesburg estates to combat crime. Farmers are also using drones for security services at night on their properties. The city of Cape Town is another interesting development of deploying drones. So the city of Cape Town has found a new way to combat crime in a gang-ridden community across the metro with the help of drones. Another interesting usage of drones by the city was the use of drones to assess the extent of the damage caused by the recent fires at the National Assembly. Drones have also developed the farming community. So with artificial intelligence, drones are now being mainstreamed for smart farming, assisting farmers in a range of tasks from analysis, planning, to actual planting of the crops, and the subsequent monitoring of the fields, to a certain health and growth within these farms. So some of the applications which have developed or been used by these smart devices include, so they capture data for individual tree stats, for compiling tree counts, height, canopy size, canopy volume, and health. Field insights, so they detect variation and problems with plant health algorithms. General field contours, and elevate models for irrigation and crop management. The data is actionable, so it reduces crop loss and boosts yield with rapid intervention. In field scouting, easily share maps or take them into field or any other device. So they're able to also analyze over time, track crop and individual plant health levels throughout the season with drone data gathered from multiple surveys. With the terror of drones, a drone might be broadly helpful until its controller is in the hands of someone who has genuine aims to create a chaos, to which drones are being more like a weapon than a device. A question which I get obviously from some of the brokers is, can a drone be hacked and controlled? As such, we know that any computing device is prone to cyber attacks, but there are a couple of caveats. So whereas drone manufacturers are constantly improving their technology, and also note that consumer drones are very different from military drones themselves. So why are drones lethal? Drones, which can possibly help people in numerous ways, can inflict harm, whether operated by an individual with wrongful intent. It is a direct result of the following reasons. So some of the drones we get are undetectable. So for example, the small drones can't be easily identified by the radar due to the tiny radar cross-section. Except if high-resolution radio frameworks are set up, empowering the discovery of drones, the chance of stealth drones sending delete information to potential foes will persist. The sizes. Destroying a drone capable of doing live transmission is of little use, as the information is now by the regulator. The main advantage is that it can be utilized by the operator. However, since these drones come in smaller sizes than expected, it is very difficult to destroy them regardless of whether they're recognized or not. Identification of origin. So regardless of whether a drone is recognized and crippled, it is absolutely impossible to distinguish who sent it. It is pivotal to know that the origin of the drone, to comprehend who the genuine foe is. The functional flexibility of drones are less expensive, more secure, and more proficient than the ordinary techniques for surveillance. Drones are automated, so there is no expected danger in individuals on the working side of drones. Intelligent cybersecurity system for Internet of Things aided drones. So as mentioned, developments in drones have opened new trends and opportunities in different fields, particularly in small drones. As drones prove interlocation service for navigation, and the interlink is provided by the Internet of Things. However, architectural issues make drone networks vulnerable to privacy and security threats. It is critical to provide a safe and secure network to acquire desired performance from these drones. Next, we have a visual of a demonstration of a GPS spoofing of a drone being intercepted.
Like Monopoly money, civil GPS signals have a detailed structure, but no built-in defense against counterfeiting or spoofing. This has serious implications for unmanned aerial systems. At the invitation of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, the University of Texas Radio Navigation Lab demonstrated this vulnerability in June 2012 by remotely hijacking a small helicopter. Virtually all commercial UAVs depend on civil GPS for navigation. After a remote operator uploads a flight plan with a destination point, signals from the orbiting GPS satellites help the UAV locate itself three-dimensionally. The UAV's autopilot then takes over, moving the UAV toward its destination. Now the malevolent spoofer enters the picture. His spoofing device might be mistaken for a legitimate ground control system, but he has an entirely illegitimate goal in mind. He wishes to hijack the UAV. Inside the UAV's GPS receiver, there is a correlation peak that corresponds to the authentic signals. These three red dots are the tracking points. They try to keep themselves centered on the peak, but the spoofer has caused a false peak to appear. When the spoofer moves the false peak into alignment with the true one, the tracking points get hijacked and the true peak is forced off to one side. The phantom helicopter sliding out the back represents the UAV's false perceived location. Now, as the autopilot commands the UAV, it is the phantom that aligns with the target destination, not the actual UAV. At this point, the spoofer has control of the UAV.
Yeah, I'm ready. I'm holding.
In this preliminary test, performed at Texas Memorial Stadium, we spoofed a hovering UAV into thinking it was moving rapidly upward. The autopilot compensated by sending the UAV hurtling downward. Days later, at White Sands Missile Range, we repeated the test, this time broadcasting spoofing signals over the air from half a mile away. As in the former test, we induced the hovering UAV into thinking it was rising. It responded by plummeting toward the desert floor.
Thank you, Kapano. It's actually a far cry from a dad and his son playing with their small drone in a field, a remote field or park somewhere, to what is possible, and actually sends shivers down my spine, particularly as an underwriter. But Thank you for that presentation. And perhaps this is an appropriate moment to introduce Ryan. And given what you've just heard, Ryan, perhaps take us through some of the aspects of what we've introduced through the drone side of things, and how that perhaps talks to the components in the drone, connectivity issues, correlation peaks, how that can ultimately end in common attacks, and perhaps the demand of service that talks to the cyber risk that we want to unpack for our audience.
Brilliant. Thanks, Greg, and thanks, Capano. Cops, I see you're driving, so if you can hop onto the next slide for me. While you're doing that, just to thank everyone for making the time available this morning. Let's unpack what are some of the cyber risks associated with drones. I think a good place to start understanding this is to look at some of the key components which play into a cyber attacker sort of hands. There's obviously several components that make up a drone, but our focus is going to be on the two essential components to fly a drone, essential components to collect, and then obviously the remote controls around that. So if we unpack those two essential components used to fly the drone, you've got the small computer, which is collecting information from the controller, from the various inputs that give it data. And then, as we saw in the prior video, the GPS chip for location. Then the two essential components of collection of data, very simple: camera, microphone. And the other components which are key for a hacker and make it an interesting proposition would be your controller, which is typically via a smartphone or tablet application. And then the big caveat, which we'll unpack on the next slide, is the connectivity and communication, which will be used to send data to and from the drone. Cops, if you can please hop onto the next slide. So the connectivity is really the lifeblood to a lot of these attack vectors, and echoes what you saw in the video. If we look at a lot of the commercial drones, there is inherent sort of connectivity weaknesses which enable attacks. Generally, these drones are flying over civilian bands, which are used for the drone communications, and those bands tend to be unencrypted, not authenticated, therefore unsecured, and operate on generally quite weak signals. Which then obviously opens up opportunities for hackers. And we'll unpack some of the attack methods that the hackers can follow. But I just want to first show you a quick video before we unpack actual common attack methods. Thanks, Cops.
We can take any drones in any industry and hack into them, take over and control them. Some of the techniques are really interesting. I mean, some things that we use every single day, like GPS, that you'd use to navigate in your car, that's exactly what drones use to autonomously pilot. But GPS is unencrypted, it's unauthenticated. So you can use $300 hardware with free software to take over GPS and to control GPS. That would be one example of hacking into a drone. I think it's a shock for the insurance industry and other industries that you can use commodity hardware, consumer-based equipment to take over and hack into tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment. I mean, you're talking about a $50,000 drone that can be hacked into. It was demonstrated just a few months ago with $100 in equipment. So yeah, it's very shocking. And I think we're going to see this continue. Just as the price of drones has come down because of the equipment inside, it's the same thing with the same tools to break into them. The insurance industry can essentially hike up rates, for example, if a drone is not using a certain security mechanism. So what I would do personally if I were in their shoes is I would say, I want to understand what are additional security mechanisms that we can put in place on a drone and say this is much less risky. Sure, there's still some risk, but I am much more confident in this because it uses encryption, authentication, multiple levels of sensors, and not just depending on one consumer sensor. And I think that'll help mitigate risk. An event like this is actually extremely interesting to me because I had no idea this existed. I had no idea there was such a large population of people dedicated to solving this problem. I never even thought about the problem. I'm on the other side and I'm trying to develop and push forward some of this technology, and I completely now see it from another angle that I didn't before. So it just, I think, will hopefully make me think twice when developing new things and how I can implement maybe a better implementation to prevent issues like that we're trying to solve here.
Still catches out the best of us. Let's unpack some of the common drone attack methods. So we've heard a lot spoken about denial of service about GPS, but let's unpack denial of service attacks. So essentially a drone is a flying computer and is susceptible to all of the same attacks which a traditional computer would be, one of those being a denial of service attack. So here, what would happen is you've got your remote control. So this would be your pilot's device. They would have a wireless connection to their drone or UAV. The attacker would then intercept and sit in the middle of this, and they would launch a DOS attack on the drone, thereby disconnecting the remote control, leading the drone to crash. So with a DOS attack or denial of service attack, effectively what happens, the attacker will flood the drone with a whole bunch of different messages and connection requests, disconnecting the remote control laptop. The operator loses control of that drone, and the attacker is then able to either let the drone crash or interject then and start to take control over that drone. Move on to the next slide, please, Cops. The other common attack method, and I think this is the one which is potentially the most concerning, is a de-authentication attack. So you could see this kind of like hanging up a phone. What will happen is the hacker will scan for, and a MAC address is effectively a network address specific to a drone, and the hacker will then scan for these addresses, identify any nearby drones. They will then send a hang-up message to that drone, effectively telling the drone, disconnect from the operator who is giving your signals what to do. That will disconnect the user and the drone from each other. And the hacker is then able to send a connection signal to the drone and thereby take over and have complete control over that drone, fly it where they want to, and take whatever actions it is that they want to do with that. I'm going to show you a quick video of this, and I think it's, in some ways, maybe you're proud, maybe we're scared, but here is a 13-year-old from South Africa in Cape Town demonstrating this at a security convention. Cops, take it away.
Drones are proving their worth at airborne deliveries and high-flying photography and just fun, until they're hacked. That's what 13-year-old Ruben Paul did at a global cybersecurity conference in Cape Town, South Africa, to show how vulnerable web-connected devices are to attack. This young cyber ninja, as he calls himself, likes to hack.
I started hacking when I was about 6 or 7. And this is when I started first getting into technology and started first researching and learning about hacking.
This hack, at the event hosted by cybersecurity provider Kaspersky Lab, was surprisingly easy, at least as Paul describes it.
I basically scanned for networks in the area. I scanned for the devices connected to the drone's network. Then I disconnected the drone and the user by sending a DOS package. After that, I connected back to the drone, and now I have full control of it. I can fly it, I can video record, I can get all kinds of data back.
And that's the danger for our internet-connected future of smart homes, driverless cars, wireless communication, and drones. Consumers rarely pay attention to the security of their devices, says Kaspersky security researcher Maher Yammout.
93% of the attacks that we saw coming into the Internet of Things are really password-related, weak password-related things.
Ruben Paul and his parents founded Cyber Shaolin, a cybersecurity awareness and education organization for young people. And he's spoken at conferences around the world with a simple message.
Technology is only going to get bigger, and that's the world we're going to be moving into. So make sure that it's secure now so that later we won't have to regret it.
Faith Lapidus, VOA News.
Some sage advice from Ruben. We've seen it play out not just in drones, but in cybersecurity in general, where there's fantastic advancements in technology. And so sometimes it's very easy to get carried away with the potential and not necessarily bake the security into these solutions, and can be quite difficult to go retrofit that in afterwards. And I think a good message there to try and make sure that we address the security concerns as early as possible so that we don't end up with a bigger issue to resolve down the road. The other common drone attack method is the GPS spoofing and GPS jamming. This ties in quite closely with the video that Cops had on earlier on. Here, what a hacker will do is they create a stronger signal which overrides the weaker GPS signal that the drone is working on. Some of the implications of that: one, the drone then loses its location. It could fly around aimlessly or crash. Or, as we saw in that video, it now has a false geolocation and can be used to send the drone to a different location, for example. Cops, next slide. So drone attacks, what are the risks? And before I touch on those, maybe just to sort of highlight an image of this, it does look like quite a humorous gun, but that is an anti-drone gun. And this is from a UN council meeting where they had people with anti-drone guns standing outside to try and prevent drones flying overhead and trying to intercept and listen in on the discussions that were being held. And this is a reality that we're faced with today. I do anticipate that we will have better looking anti-drone guns in the future. That does look quite a weapon to be yielding, but nevertheless, that is where we're at the moment. So what are some of the risks? And to unpack this, I think in two main areas. One is a hack drone, and then the second one, which is quite interesting and I think is a developing trend, is drones to actually conduct hacks. So if we looked at hack drones, I think relatively easy to unpack. What are some of the scenarios here? Theft of data from the drone, hack in. I can now filter in and listen on whatever communications it is or information it's gathering and data and it's passing down. So you can step to read all of those. You can break into the drone. You can send it to a different location. You start to see Amazon using drones for deliveries. Now you can start stealing people's Amazon deliveries, or you can steal the drone itself. Some of these are obviously worth a fair bit of money. You can possibly look to interrupt flight traffic. So you might have some sort of activists who are wanting to get in the way of flight paths over an airport by flying their drone there. This could cause absolute havoc. You could crash drones into planes, cars, and people. In doing some of the research, I came across a video, which I haven't got in here just for time's sake, but where they tested to see what would be the impact of a drone flying into an aircraft wing, and it was somewhat concerning. Granted, they weren't doing it on a sort of massive liner. It was more on a commercial sort of private jet, but would have the ability to destroy and damage that wing significantly. So something to be very wary of, and obviously crashing into cars and people could be a big issue as well. As far as drones to hack, this is an interesting one. So common technologies for near sort of field communications, things which we use every day, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, RFID, work over a relatively narrow or short limited area. And that's one of the defenses against these. Although we have seen the normal cyber where if you don't have your Wi-Fi closely coupled or with good authentication on it, you could have somebody drive by, scan, and try and authenticate onto that network. Now, all of a sudden, you have a drone which can be used to fly in and get that much closer to try and attack these sorts of technologies. What we've also seen is people mounting small computers like a Raspberry Pi onto the drone, this then being used to actually exploit that Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or RFID connection or vulnerabilities in these technologies and the connections they established, and then do things like mimic Wi-Fi. So to paint a hypothetical example, I fly a drone, park it on an office building's roof, then use my Wi-Fi, my Raspberry Pi to scan for the Wi-Fi networks, look to break into that Wi-Fi network, and all of a sudden I'm now connected to the corporate network of that building that I've landed on. I can access data on there. I can then intercept data as it's flowing around on that Wi-Fi network and steal data in that manner or cause other damages. Another one which I thought was quite interesting is the ability to hijack the Bluetooth on a mouse or a keyboard, for example, and then use keyloggers to steal passwords and data from these devices like that. It's definitely a new developing trend. From our side, we haven't seen many instances of drones being used to hack, but one that's on the horizon and worth keeping our eyes on. I think to echo what Ruben said is that as the number of drones and the applications for drones continues to increase, because we really are just scratching the surface of the technology and the possibilities that the technology brings to us, these risks are going to grow and they're going to become a lot more attractive to hackers who will find different mechanisms to use the capabilities of the drones and the actions that they can take with the drones. Cops, on to the next slide. I thought I'd look to round off just with a couple of tips on how to safeguard drones and try and prevent against some of these attacks. So first one, and it is amazing to see the parallels with normal cyber on this, apply security and related patches and updates. So the drone manufacturers do quite often release patches and updates and firmware updates to the devices themselves and to the controlling applications to try and patch against security weaknesses and vulnerabilities on these. So really important to make sure that you're up to date and applying those patches as they become available. Use a secure Wi-Fi for the controller on the drone. Make sure it's got strong authentication onto it so that it's not as easy to intercept and get onto those signals and then take control. Use secure passwords, and wherever possible, make use of multi-factor authentication for the authentication between these devices. Look to limit the number of devices that can connect to your base station, if possible, just to one, to prevent other devices trying to then get on top there, and enable the return to home mode on the drone. And I think, just to reiterate what I said previously, as the applications for the drones increase, so does their appeal to hackers. And this is really an area that we're going to see a lot of activity and a lot of hacking and a lot of, not just on the drones, but drones to hack emerging over the next couple of years. Thanks, Cops.
Thank you, Ryan. I always get very sweaty palms when you talk about cyber, and now you're in our space and drones, and I've got even sweaty palms and sweaty brow. But it's the reality, and we need to be aware of it. As Lwanda said in his comments there, password coming up again. I think one of the guys interviewed mentioned that 93% of the issues they found with hacking related to weak passwords and so on. So again, the issue of passwords coming up and rearing its head. For me, the biggest concern is always a false geolocation, that a hacker gets hold of a drone and then moves it into space that becomes very dangerous. And that, for us as underwriters on the commercial operators policy, is the reality of what we need to be concerned about. And so I think to round off today, I think it's very relevant that COPS takes us through a little bit about the technical insurance speak on what the iTOO commercial drones policy response would be under the various circumstances. So we've positioned how the drone can be hacked. We understand from Ryan the consequences and perhaps the technical aspects of how a hacker gets to do that and what the potential cyber threats can be. But let's see how the insurance speaks to that. So Cops, if I can ask you to finish off for us and give us some insight into the policy, if you don't mind.
Thanks a lot, Greg. And once again, obviously, thanks a lot to Ryan for an insightful, obviously, session there into some of the attacks which are commonly known out there in the world. Just to take you through, obviously, the iTOO commercial drones policy response. We do have iTOO cyber definitions on our wording itself. So with the iTOO, a cyber attack is an unauthorized malicious or criminal act or series of related unauthorized malicious or criminal acts, regardless of the time and place or the threat or the hoax, therefore involving access to processing of use of or operation of any computer system. We further also define a cyber incident as an error or omission or series of related errors or omissions involving access to processing of use or operation of any computer system. Partial or totally unavailability or failure or series of unrelated partial or total unavailability of failures to access, process, use, or operate any computer systems. Those are some of the definitions, obviously, we speak to with regards to our cyber offering within our drone policy itself. So with some of the extensions which we have applicable to our policy, we have a hull wall, which is automatically included because obviously we are aware of the vulnerability of the drones which are surfacing in the application of certain industries. Because we also know that drones are obviously prone to cyber hacks. We've included this extension automatically for clients itself. So this extension obviously speaks to the physical loss or damage to the UAS and the UAS spares as well. So in this section, we simply do provide cover for any hijacking, spoofing, hacking, or any other unlawful seizure or wrongful exercise of control of the UAS, including any attempt at such seizure or control, acting without your consent. We also further extend the offering to our third-party war liability for any third-party injuries caused for any property or bodily injuries. Because we know that a drone might be hacked from an operator himself, and probably someone obviously flies a drone into someone's building or someone drops a drone on a body, our policy or third-party liability obviously extends to cover within the policy limit chosen by the client themselves. We further offer a cyber extension for loss of digital assets. So with this extension, this is obviously optional for the client to take up. So the insurer will reimburse you for digital assets loss in excess of the applicable deductible specified on the schedule as a direct result of damage, alteration, corruption, distortion, theft, misuse, or destruction of your digital assets directly causing a computer virus, whether through malicious or non-malicious act. So when you add this additional extension on to the policy, this doesn't initially cover the hacking or the spoofing of the drone itself. What we're simply offering with this extension, we are offering you the cost of recreating the data which you had captured. So for instance, I'm surveying on a farm, and then obviously it costs me money to get to that farm and create that application. So with this extension, if my drone is hacked and my information is lost from that or from a computer virus, what we simply entail with this extension is that we'll cover the cost of you to recreate or replace or recreate or restore the digital assets which you lost during that hack immediately before damage, alteration, corruption, distortion, or theft will be covered in that instance. So we sublimit this limit to a limit of 60,000 to 100,000 to be able to recreate the work which you have lost during that operation. That's how our policy would respond for any cyber incident which would occur. To a certain extent, we also do encourage our drone clients to take up an additional cyber policy, obviously, to cover for certain breaches which might occur. From my side, thank you a lot for giving me time.
Excellent, Copson. Thank you very much for that. Much appreciated. And rounding off the context of how the iTOO commercial operators policy steps in. To everyone, we have kept it rather short and sweet. I know there's quite a lot of information to take in, particularly around the elements of the technical aspects of how the hacking takes place. So we did feel that those videos would be, helpful and descriptive. And so we just wanted to extend an invite to join us next week to part 2, where we will take you through elements of perhaps some of the nicer elements of what drones are capable of. And Gail Bosch, who looks after our iTOO business, will join me and Cops and a few others, including a special guest that I've invited and has agreed to join us, to talk a little bit more about photography and drones and the wonderful aspects of what they bring to filmmaking, film producing, documentaries, broadly what people are able to do with them in their personal capacity nowadays, obviously within the regulations. And we can then take that on to some of the nice parts of drones. So thank you very much. And thanks for joining us.
Greg, I see we've got one question that was posted in the Q&A. And the question is, are drones regarded as computer systems?
Drones regarded as computer systems. Iran, you there?
So I suppose you could, because it does have an input to it. It has got a processing capability, and then there is output from it. So possibly not complete computer system on its own, but definitely an IoT device, which would form part of a larger computer system ecosystem as such.
Cool.
Yeah.
And Ryan and Greg, if you've got a client that owns drones and runs a business using drones, would they need both the cyber and the drone policy, or is there a combined policy?
It's a fantastic. Do you want to jump on that one, Greg?
Yeah, so there isn't a combined policy other than we offer from the drones point of view, the cyber extension. And we actually had this discussion yesterday and again this morning about the overlay and perhaps the cross-pollination. But to our opinion would be that from the business side, you would need to have both in place. And Kapana, jump on here when you want to, but we use the example of a surveillance operator who's operating on a mine site, for example. Now, the mining site won't let them anywhere near their property until they have, in the region of $5 million worth of liability. That's the first point, which we offer on the drone policy. But the cyber extension is limited on the drone side because it doesn't take care of the multiple covers that you find in the broader cyber policy. And therefore, the recommendation is to take both, to protect both the elements of the potential liability on the cyber side and the drone operator having to restore, for example, the data that's been lost because the hackers got hold of the drone itself and it's potentially crashed. So down goes all the data and is lost. On the cyber policy side, you have all of the covers that Ryan ordinarily would enunciate and give you from a cyber security point of view. And so the recommendation there is to have both, particularly where you're working with sensitive information that's being collated. And I used the example of a mine that has information that they don't want in the hands of Joe Public, given that you get access to know exactly where everything is kept, how they're operating, and so on and so forth. Ryan, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I think some of the key items that come to mind if you're looking at the sort of full-blown cyber offering, which would be particularly relevant, would be the liability portion. So if there is sensitive data which is lost, stolen, or compromised, and there is any legal action ensuing from that, you would have the cyber liability portion. You could well introduce POPI concerns, so you may well have to go the process of notifying the affected parties and notifying the regulator if there is a compromise of data. The other one that jumps to mind is the extortion. So if, for example, somebody's now stolen data off of the drone and they're extorting you not to release or publish that information, the cyber policy will jump in there as well. So the liability and extortion are two big ones that jump to mind straight off the bat. And possibly the forensic investigations to determine where and how that information was actually compromised.
Yeah, thank you. And to some of the comments that are being made, yes, it is scary, and we understand that. But forewarned is forearmed, and I think it's relevant going into this massive expansion of technology that is now being put into our skies. One way or another, we need to be cognizant of the things that people are capable of doing. And I'm not talking about the military context. I'm talking about in the private and corporate espionage type context, and just the ability to get hold of a drone and fly it into restricted airspace, as Ryan alluded to, putting it in front of a commercial airliner is what keeps us awake at night. That kind of liability exposure is not good. But thank you to all of you for joining us. I don't think there are any other questions. Tobe, if I've missed any, just let me know.
There's a couple of hands. There's a couple of hands which I saw being raised.
Oh, okay. Apologies.
Mandy and Fred, not sure if they want to unmute.
Yes, hi, Greg. I think we've had some email communications before, and I don't know if this is the right platform to discuss cover issues or cover possibilities. But just as you know, one of our specific clients were asking what is the possibility of a pay-as-you-go option, because obviously they've got different projects that they're doing throughout the year. So the scope of work will change from season to season, and the drones won't be in the air all the time. So that he's looking at a pay-as-you-go. You simply log on from your cell phone, your mobile, pay for the time that you're using the drone in the air, and then whatever limit of liability is requiring. Because one client might also just require 5 million, while the next project might require 25 million, and he then pays on that spot for that specific cover that he's requiring. I don't know what the possibilities of that is in the near future.
Yeah, so the possibilities are good in the reasonably near future. We are looking at that. Right now, what we have is a distinction between an annual and a short-term policy. And in fact, we have some clients, and again, we can take this offline afterwards, but who actually have an annual policy and then add short-term dependent on the requirement from the client's offering. But not sure whose dogs are barking in the background, but so the context can be both short-term and annual, and they, for example, film producers get a contractual requirement to add a very high liability dollar amount. They will buy the short-term period just for that, and often these things are out of country, so we then allocate a short-term policy to that. Bearing in mind, obviously, the efficiencies of purchasing on annual versus short-term are not always in favor of short-term. But we are working towards, as many of you know, a digital environment across the iTOO platform of all our product suites. And one of those in the pipeline is drones. And we would like to take pay as you fly under the context that the requirement is there, or the efficiency of an annual policy where you're flying on a daily basis or regularly, and you don't want to be buying insurance every 5 seconds. So I hope that answers the question, and we can definitely take it offline, Manny, and deal with your specific requirement.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Anybody else? I think there was, Cops, you mentioned other hands. I didn't see any myself, sorry.
There was one last question from Petro. Will this be insured on an all risk base? I'm not sure if she's, yeah.
Cops, you want to answer that?
So certainly we move away from the all risk basis. I think we offer comprehensive cover in terms of drone operations. So, because an all-risk cover obviously wouldn't cover in-flight, so hence I move away from the word of all risk, so move it to a comprehensive in-flight cover.
Maybe to add to that,
thank you very much.
Sure, thank you, and thanks for the question. To add to that, we, as I said earlier in the presentation, we are looking to evolve constantly as the requirements evolve, and iTOO has strictly provided a commercial operators policy in line with commercial operations, but we're also cognizant and mindful of the fact that the world is evolving very quickly, and the uses of drones are being applied across multiple industries, and very importantly across a massive growing industry in the form of agriculture in South Africa. And we have to be aware of how the users will adopt the technology in their business, and this is what we have to bear in mind. So we're constantly looking at how the policy can stay ahead of the requirements, and that's not always possible in insurance speak, but we are trying, and to this end we engage with our reinsurers and we engage with industry experts. We look at the regulators, how they're evolving, how the classification model is being considered by people like SACAA, and if they can keep up with the evolution of what the requirements are for drone operators and those that are not entirely commercial or corporate but rather business use, then we're going to evolve with that, and that then starts to talk to the realm of people in recreational space as well, which we are considering, but we're not there yet. I hope that answers the question. Toba, if that's it, I think we could probably say goodbye in our usual fashion and thank everyone for joining us. And please join us again next week. We look to bring you some nice visuals and exciting stuff around the photography side and the surveillance type work that's being done in drones, and the beautiful stuff that many of these film producers are producing for our screens nowadays. So thank you all for your time today. And thank you, Ryan and Cops, for your insightful preso.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Have a fantastic Tuesday further.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks to you, yourself, Ryan, and Greg, obviously.